that. It's probably here to stay. Got it. It is kind of weird. Something with the headphones. I'm not going to worry about it. Nonetheless, what's all these pop-up things over here?
I don't know, but we're alive.
Well, then let's ignore those pop-ups. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Welcome to One-on-One Live with Coach Blu and Athletic Director Marissa.
Hello.
It's good to have you guys all here on the approach to the Halloween, right?
The Halloween.
Yeah. Did you catch the Party in the Back podcast with Josh and I yesterday?
I didn't.
It's about spooky running stories, pretty funny ones.
Are these your running stories?
They are. One of mine, one of Josh's, and some we found on Reddit. It's pretty funny. Get you in the mood to, I guess, get the bejeebies scared down here.
Kylie and I have a scary running story. I just remembered.
Do you?
Yeah.
What was it?
When we used to run on Carterville, one night, the very end of it, where it's like almost right before that roundabout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incident with something scary.
What was it?
We just figured it was a raccoon because then I just put it out of my mind but the sounds and what happens, we ran home real fast.
That doesn't sound too scary, but nonetheless.
Well, because when you can rationalize it, but if you thought it was you would have been scared to death.
That's actually probably very true. Do you remember the time we went walking? We found that zombie lady that was out walking too.
Did you share that?
I didn't even think about it till just now because that was that's how traumatic. That's why I don't remember it.
That one did scare me. She didn't have a face.
Yeah, she didn't. Yeah, and we have our daughter to prove that too.
Because all three of us, and it's one of those things you're like, this isn't happening. My mind's playing tricks. So you don't say anything, and it wasn't till later I said, "Did any of you guys
did anybody catch her face?" Yeah,
she was in a nightgown at like 11:30.
At the mouth of Hobble Creek Canyon. So maybe there's a ghost. I don't know.
11:30 at night.
Let's not drill down on that because I'll never want to run there again. Let's just jump into this, shall we?
Didn't have a face, and I don't fall for that kind of crap. Oh man, like Blu does.
I think you do. I think you're just too tough for it.
Yeah.
Anywho, hey everyone, welcome. We're glad to have you guys here. This is your opportunity to jump on with questions. Maybe if you have anything that is on your heart, pressing on your mind, maybe addiction related, mental health related, recreational based, what have you, we're here to help. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and addictions counselor. Marissa is a certified recreational therapist. Together, we created the Addict to Athlete program to help you guys overcome addiction, mental health, and trauma through health, recreation, service, and those types of things. So we're glad to have you here. This will be a podcast that will be posted tomorrow. So if for some reason you get caught by the boss listening to the podcast when you should be working, don't worry, just jump on. It'll be posted tomorrow on any platform that you guys
Apple, Spotify, wherever, Pandora, it's all over.
Yeah, absolutely. But also we want to thank you all for helping us out with our Project ELF. This is our yearly charity drive that we use as a reason to help give back to those who are struggling with addictions, who found themselves on hard times that need assistance with Christmas. Yep. The application process is open. If you're in the greater Utah Valley area, let us know. Wasatch Front. We'd love to help you if you need. The sooner you apply, the more chances you'll have to be accepted, because we want to get this stuff done early enough so that you at home can make, I guess, the arrangements to pick it up so that you don't have to worry about this aspect. Let us help you if you need it.
If you know of a family who maybe has been affected by addiction or mental health, and you know that they're struggling maybe to get Christmas this year and you'd like to nominate a family, please email me, Marissa, at addicttoathlete.org. Or if you are interested in sponsoring a family, I've already had people reach out who have sponsored in the past that are so excited, because we have an amazing group of volunteers, donors, sponsors that help us do this Christmas. It's a huge undertaking. So if you're interested in helping, please contact me as well.
Absolutely. So thank you all so much for your donations. You still have the ability to do so. Just jump on our socials. You'll find the link to our Project ELF fundraising drive, and we'd love to have you be part of this amazing experience. But also I want to thank everybody who are part of our Patreon family. You guys are allowing us to push this podcast out further. You're giving us tons of resources and abilities to get this message spread out to lots of people. Our numbers are increasing each week, and it's awesome to see you guys sharing this podcast. So I appreciate you doing that. But our Patreon subscribers, you guys are rock stars. Thank you so much. We're doing all kinds of bonus episodes. We've got some finalizations on your gear we'll be putting together to get you guys sent out your shirts and hoodies and stickers and all that fun stuff. But really, we couldn't do this without you. So you want to share with the listeners, those who I believe in my heart of heart are champions.
Yes. Our super fans are Karen Hardy, Steve Riggs, Tracy Whitby, Jerem chilling in Brazil, Thurston, even though he's in St. George right now, but he's headed back in about a week. Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Brett Frew, Chris Williams, and Sensei KP.
Thank you.
Thank you to our super fans. The rookies are Sione and Mary Inuk, Sherry Polson, and Earl Dyer. Thank you, our rookies. And our pro level, Andrew Baird, Wendell Wood, and Gary, my dad, Thurston. And our champion level subscribers are the Robinson family and Ron and D. Loesch. Thank you, all of our Patreon people. If you are interested in becoming a patron, there's tons and tons of bonus episodes. And then there's also extra exclusive swag. Get on patreon.com/addicttoathlete. You can do it for as little as $2 a month.
Absolutely. And we just, again, shout out and thanks to all of you guys that participate. $2 a month gets you all of the bonus content. Anything above that is like all that swag she's talking about. So thank you, Patreon subscribers. We love you. I'm looking forward to Friday. We're going to be joining one of our Patreon families, the Robinsons. They're going to come out and help us do a Red Ribbon Week assembly for school out there. I'm going to introduce them to Emma and Team Robinson to go out there and serve in the caliber of assisted athletes. So that's going to be fun. Hopefully we can get some good pictures and stuff to let you guys know how it went.
Yeah.
So Marissa, we've got quite a few questions here, but we got one that came in just on the heels of us wrapping up the show last week.
Yeah.
And it was such a good question that I wanted to answer it on air. So why don't we start with that one and kind of see where the snowball takes us. I really wish yesterday at our Addict to Athlete meeting, the live would have worked, because we talked very deep about relationships. And I may kind of recap some of that today just because of how important the topic was about rebuilding relationships once addiction's kind of been discovered, and even the process of how do you heal from those. So we'll maybe jump into that just because there were so many good things that we addressed. And it was funny because the girls, Savannah and Brooklyn, our daughters, were here doing some things, and I was able to bring them into the conversation unknowns to them. And it was awesome to get their frame of mind on some of the things we talked about as a family system, to a degree, all of us serving in one way or not in the caliber of helping people overcome addiction. So I'll share maybe some thoughts on that, but let's jump into this question first.
Good idea. Okay. So we had been talking about trauma and mental health last week, and that is what this question goes along with, is how do you know what trauma is causing what mental health issue? Because there's so many. Mm-hmm. Or if you personally are struggling and have multiple different, traumas or mental health and multiple traumas, how do you know to go back? Because you always talk about going back to the core issue and addressing that. How do you know?
So the interesting thing about addiction that I've noticed is that it's kind of like an autopsy, if you will. Once you kind of start getting into maybe the cause, like you see in every crime show, they walk up on a crime scene, they see a deceased individual, they start looking for clues, and they start reverse engineering kind of what went down, right? Yeah. And there's always clues that lead to a discovery, that lead to another clue that hopefully will lead to like the understanding of what's happened. I think the same kind of concept applies to addiction recovery and addiction itself. What I've noticed, and this is, again, World According to Blu, and this is just things of my career that I've noticed, is that everything that I've noticed people use, by the way they act, certain situations and problems that they face, they all have these connecting lines. And what I mean by that is if you look at people who typically will smoke marijuana or drink alcohol, 9 times out of 10, sometimes 10 out of 10, there's some kind of depression there. And what happens is they start using substances and they find the one that works. They begin to truly like self-medicate. We don't really think about it that way because we think, well, I'm just doing this to do it. But you start peeling back the layers, start finding the clues, and you'll find the sources. So, alcohol, marijuana, those kind of things, depressing, right? Depressants. Yeah. I start looking at things like methamphetamine, the bigger, better, faster, stronger, the more involved, the more talkative. I want to be engaged. I want to ride it for all I can. That adrenaline burst, right? Start looking at like opiates, pain medication. Well, something hurts, right? Like If you're taking pain medication, opiates, you probably have some kind of pain, whether that be emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, something hurts.
Yeah.
Then you get into like things like benzodiazepines, like the anti-anxiety medications. These are people that have severe trauma, severe stuff that's happened to them. They don't want to feel good. They don't want to feel bad. They want to feel nothing, which is why I think the benzos are probably one of the scariest drugs. And then we can go on from there. But what you do is when you see these substances that people start using as their drug of choice, you start rewinding the tape to find out what's causing that. So if you're looking at like, okay, so where's some of this trauma coming from? Like what kind of diagnosis do we look for when we have someone that faces addiction? Primarily what you'll find when people come in for addiction is that's a symptom to that deeper problem, right?
Yeah.
So it's like if you have a cold and you're coughing and you're sneezing, you can go to the store and get some medicine that will take away the coughing and the sneezing. It'll suppress that. But do you still have the cold?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's the same thing with addiction, right? If we just treat the symptoms, taking away the drug, build them up, boost them up to have a healthier mindsets about themselves without going to the source of it, all we're doing is suppressing that behavior, suppressing the obvious. We're not healing that core. Mm-hmm. So you start kind of looking at this whole picture and you start thinking, okay, most addiction, and I'd say, and I say this a lot, 9 times out of 10, addiction is born from trauma. Something hurt. They've been experienced, they've witnessed, they've been the recipient of some kind of pain.
And as an interjection here, I guess, is trauma, people often will look at it as it has to be something huge. It's got to be some big, mind-numbing, car accident or child molestation or something huge, and it doesn't. Trauma is trauma and pain is pain, and we're not assessing the level of it or the intensity of it, because each person, it's in the eye of the beholder. Some smaller incident to one person could be a huge incident to the other, and it's not for us to judge. So trauma comes all over, all different shapes and all different sizes. So don't think, oh, I've never had trauma, this isn't a big deal, because you're trying to compare your trauma with someone else. Don't do that.
And sometimes people get upset with that, but when you start peeling back the layers, it doesn't really, and this sounds kind of mean, but please hear me out. It doesn't matter the mechanism of pain. It doesn't matter the route, the person, the individual. Once that happens, that trauma all feels the same. Doesn't matter, like Marissa said, if it's something severe or something that would on someone else's scale look fairly mild. That emotional pain we go through is one and the same. Mm-hmm. So when we start comparing pain and trauma to others, like you have nothing to complain about. I was beaten as a kid and we were poverty stricken. When someone else says, well, I was ridiculed while in a spelling bee. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter, because at the source code of that, it hurt.
Yep, it's painful.
Yeah. And so I really do appreciate you clarifying that. But what we do is we start looking at, okay, so what's driving the addiction? What's the addiction telling us? And, for many years, most programs have kind of gone around, identifying the symptoms and helping suppress those and eliminate them. But if we don't go to the core, we're going to get stuck. And so the question kind of revolves around, like, how do we know, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is the hard part, because the person that's seeking the treatment needs to be in a spot where they feel emotionally safe and vulnerable enough to start exploring. Now, there's a few things that I've noticed, specifically working with EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a modality that helps people process trauma. And what I've noticed is that people that have trauma, it becomes part of their story. It becomes part of them. They are the trauma.
Most of the time, because it is so old, because it's just part of who they are, and it's very ingrained into how they react to situations, their personality, because it's been there for so long that they believe that that's part of their description of who they are.
Absolutely. And so when you look at a situation like EMDR, where there's the ability to not forget, but to kind of like process and store away, like to let it go, figuratively speaking, it's kind of hard, because some people have like literally founded their life on it. Like, I am this. So if you don't replace it with something of greater value, like our erase and replace philosophy on Addict to Athlete, you start seeing that people hold on to it, because there's this secondary gain I've noticed. And the secondary gain is when people have the trauma, but they don't know how to live without it. It's become their person. They've become part of them. And that's kind of a dangerous thing, because what happens when you help them process that, And then they have this gaping like void.
Mhm.
What do you fill that with? Right.
Yeah.
Cross addiction, things of that nature. And so realistically, what I like to do is to go back and find where this stuff started. What false beliefs did you begin to like take on board that was truth, that you felt was truth, you know? And typically that happens at a younger age. Typically that happens right between about ages, 5 to teenage years, up to 19, where you start kind of bringing on board a lot of that like misunderstanding, like, my parents are always arguing, there's always fighting, they're physically abusive with me. You cannot not internalize that as your fault.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
As
And
a child.
even when parents don't do it on purpose, even if it's collateral damage to that spot, it's still one and the same, where kids will take upon themselves that trauma
And blame.
because they don't know what else to do with it. How could it not be me?
Well, and one of the things that you've discussed before, I think it's worth repeating, is oftentimes if you're looking at substance abuse and misuse, what you do if you're saying, okay, well, which trauma is it, is to go back and look at when did the abuse, like the drug use, start. And this may be something else. So if you're looking at maybe when did self-harm start, or when did some negative coping skills and negative behaviors, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be just substance use. When did it start? And then go back 2 years and what was going on. You've said multiple times,
Yeah.
2 years before that is often a triggering event.
It's one of the most interesting things that I noticed, that on average, it takes about 2 years post-traumatic event for individuals to find that substance that suppresses that feeling. And so it's interesting. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but more often than not, it's about 2 years, which I think is kind of strange.
Mm-hmm.
But think about that for a minute, right? You're an adult and you come into my group and I'm like, hey, tell me about your history. And they say, well, we did this, we did that at age, 14. I was introduced to marijuana and alcohol, started using that, off and on, but then it got really heavy when I turned 18. And they'll give me their whole story. And they'll say, well, what was going on in life at age 12? If you first started using at age 14, what was going on at age 12? And they'll be like, nothing really. Like, it's kind of a typical childhood. We moved from Southern California to Utah. And I'm like, hey, here we go. I had a hard time adjusting to school, but you know what? It worked. I got my friends, but maybe the friends were kind of those that weren't, didn't have their best interests in mind. Started arguing with my parents a little bit. I kind of pushed away from the church because they wanted me to go to church. All these things. And it's funny because they don't realize that that's a traumatic experience, moving from a place that you felt you had roots to a place that you are completely brand new in a critical time of life.
And starting to make brand new friendships, having to start over. Is that a bad thing? No. But that obviously, if this person has like demoted to like negative coping skills, it did affect them. Even if they're like, no, it wasn't that big of a deal, it did somewhere.
Yeah. And so they don't realize that even though to them it may seem minor, it was still enough to get the snowball rolling down the hill that collectively got larger and larger until they found a way to cope with that. It's also been, I've worked with people whose first substance abuse experience was like at age, like 10. And I'm thinking, okay, what was going on? Well, mom would have me drink alcohol in my bottle so I could go to sleep. And it's these things that we don't really kind of take into consideration. But on average, it's about 2 years. And like I said, sometimes more, sometimes less. But it's the strangest thing that it takes about that long for your emotional understanding on how to cope with this to come forward. But then, listeners, you also
feeling unsettled because of the incident.
Yeah, you have to also recognize the fact that it's going to be about 2 years before anyone else around you notices.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the thing, right? A kid comes home in their teenage years, and all of a sudden you start noticing that there's a problem because they're coming in late, they're smelling of marijuana. Maybe you're finding the vapes in their pants pockets and things. That didn't just start last week.
Mm-mm.
On average,
often. I hear this so much. They just started hanging out with the wrong crowd. That is just another symptom, honestly. If you're looking at, okay, what's the real issue? It's not because they were hanging around the wrong friends.
Yeah.
That again is a symptom that's similar to then they've started using marijuana. That is just a symptom. So you still need to go back, further as to why that's who were the friends were that they were seeking out. Why did they continue to hang out with those friends? Obviously, they were meeting some need because there was something else prior to the negative friends.
Yeah. So we take this a little bit further. About 1 in 8 people live with some kind of mental disorder right now. And it will vary in severity, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have people that have, chronic depression that can have very successful lives and be involved, but they just feel like they're a little bit out of step. And so a lot of these won't necessarily develop into substance abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Some majorities probably won't manifest into self-harm or suicide. But it's probably important to be aware that everyone's probably got something, you know what I'm saying?
For sure.
And so I think when you start looking at it, you start classifying it down into things like anxiety disorders. When you look at anxiety and depression, sometimes people get these confused, but the way that I've always loved explaining this, Marissa, is that anxiety is fear and worry about future.
Yeah, what's coming.
Where depression, fear and worry about what's happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that in your constant state, that depression is like, I'm never going to amount to anything because I've, lost this situation, or I've, missed that opportunity, or
staying stuck just in traumatic issues that happened in the past and being able to not get out of it.
Yeah. So anxiety with excessive worry and fear-based behaviors and those kind of things, the only way to truly let that anxiety go is to go through it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so EMDR with future templating works very well for this because it takes away some of the fear, because we always future trip into something negative.
Often.
And very rarely does anything negative happen. Right.
Yeah.
I think you can manifest it. I think you can convince yourself into that.
Yeah.
But more often than not, I remember working with lots of folks that would be ready to go to court or something, and they'd be so anxiety riddled, and they would just be so terrified, thinking maybe I should just run. But they go in, they come back, and they're like, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
But the judge was happy that I had made this progress. They told me to stick with it, to finish treatment. And if you would have ran, what would have happened?
Yeah.
Right. So anxiety can be crippling too, because
it keeps us from acting.
It does. It keeps you from acting. So think about it in terms of a new mother, right? New mothers typically have anxiety because there's this fear of now I'm responsible for this thing.
How do I protect and care for?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be ready? Do I know what to do? Do I know? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about anxiety too is it's contagious.
Yeah.
How have you noticed anxiety being contagious?
I've been around people that I'm not not a anxious person in most cases, but I've been around people that just the energy they put off, or how they start talking about things that they're anxious about, it spreads, and I become anxious and I become worried, or they're sharing so much that I'm like, oh no, I guess I should be thinking about this. Maybe I should be worrying more.
Yeah. It's like when you go and you see everyone stockpiling toilet paper, you're like, maybe I should grab some of that.
Everyone did it a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. Yep. But I think one of the most amazing connections I've made with this, just by observing the world, and this is something I'd like you to tell, was when you were a lifeguard and you noticed a mother come to retrieve their kid and she realized he was in the pool.
Yeah.
What happened?
Often I've taught swim lessons for many, many years. And so I teach kids, and the kids seem to be fine. And then the second mom comes in, or mom comes to pick up the child, and they're doing something mom wasn't expecting. All of a sudden mom's face is like, oh, and they even that sound of, oh, are they okay?
When you do that when I'm driving and I'm thinking we're going to get in a wreck, and you're like, look at this cute picture on the phone. I'm like, Marissa, don't do that.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden the child goes, because they trust, they love, they bond to the parent. And so they go, oh my gosh, this is bad. This is wrong. I'm doing something wrong. And all of a sudden they get scared and they get stiff, and then panic sets in, and all of a sudden they can't swim, and they want to hurry and go to the side and go be retrieved by mom. And I'm like, they were just fine. They're not worried about this. But mom sends that message that it's scary or something's wrong, and then the child adopts it. And so most often our children will also have the exact same fears that we have, because we have put that on them and created an environment where those certain scenarios, whether it's water or spiders or the dark, can go on to a child.
Yeah. So things like panic attacks and those kind of things. Sometimes there's also medical like associations with these. But excessive anxiety can be crippling, and it will stunt growth in loved ones around you, specifically if they watch. And I've seen this with parent-child relationships as it pertains to food and things of like eating disorders, where those are passed down because there's a fear of what potentially could happen. And without you knowing it, just by your mannerisms, your mindsets, your tones, you can definitely like spread this onto the kids and the people around you without really even knowing it. The only way to get through anxiety is to face it. Then you have living proof that you can do hard things. And I would highly recommend doing this with a therapist, maybe doing some future templating with the EMDR kind of modality, because it takes away some of the rough edges, some of those unknowns, so that when you have the experience, although it's not line for line, precept by precept, it truly is like the same feeling. Like, I feel like I've done this before and I can do it again. And I loved future templating in EMDR.
So I have a follow-ups with this. It's saying, how do you know which trauma is causing the current issue? And then let me find it. There was a follow-up with that. If there is no drug abuse or alcohol use, and you know you have issues and you're seeing a therapist, how do you know what to talk about?
Gotcha. That's a fantastic thing. See, no, that's a great question, because many times when clients come into my office, if it's super easy for me to just start like asking questions, tell me how you're feeling today. I'm fine. Oh, you're by the heavy side when you walked in, it didn't seem like that. Like, tell me about that. And the thing is we have a hard time letting people in, specifically if you're going to someone to like open up to. And the hardest part about that is, what are you willing to share? When I went to therapy for the very first time, I didn't know that you could keep things away. And so when I was telling my therapist about all the things that brought me to his office, and he said, I think I kind of know where we start. He said, you just don't know who you are. And I remember that making me so mad, because like, dude, he's wrong. That's a rhetorical question.
Me. I've only been here for 30 minutes.
Yeah. I'm like, no one can answer that. How stupid is that? And I left. And then I went and talked to Marissa, and the story goes, she explained to me that you can answer this. So my mindset was, why don't I know who I am? And how did this person like pinpoint that? Because it was true. I had made up so many like attributes about myself that weren't real, that I forgot who I was. I didn't know. So the thing is why are you going to therapy in the first place? What's bringing you in that office? And I'm going to tell you, you do know exactly what you need, and you have everything you need inside of you to overcome it. How willing are you to put words to it? It's not an easy thing to go in there and say, because of child abuse, that my mother put me through, I need to go to someone who I don't know if I can trust or will even care. And what are they going to do to help me to overcome that? And through that process of me like trying to figure out with my therapist why I didn't know who I was, I started discovering some things. And this is where it gets hard, because many of us learn these things at a young age. Therefore, we have to understand that our parents have stewardship in some of the trauma. But let's say that you have these great childhoods and that your parents, did the best they could, but you still felt a certain way. It's not their fault, but they have stewardship in it. So most people stay away from therapy because they're like, I don't want to drag my parents through this.
Yeah.
And that's not what you have to do. But healthy parents will say, hey, I know, we know that we've done some things with our kids that probably hurt. And we've had to process that, and we've had to talk about those kind of things, and they've had to call us out. But it doesn't mean that relationship's going to end. What it means is that you'll understand. My mother did the best she could. And that's hard for me to like wrap my mind around, because it sucked. But I'm here. And because of that, because of the experiences that I went through with her, that has become my gain. So it's not easy to go in and say, you know what, therapist. And in fact, if you're going to a therapy session and you're hoping that they'll heal you, you're going to waste your money. Because my biggest thing with therapy, it sounds funny, but I'll never ask my clients, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Why, Marissa?
Because it's feelings come after thoughts. So it's, how do you think which then creates the feelings, which then creates behaviors.
If you truly want to change your world, you've got to change your thinking. And that is not easy to do, because it's like this. So when I was presented with this and I started formulating kind of like my core issue stuff of like what drives this, the first thing I thought about is we are a society that operates in feelings.
Mhm.
You'll hear it so much. I feel that I feel like the country is going down the wrong path. I feel like, we're at World War III's gates any second now. I feel that every politician's a crook. Those aren't feelings.
Well, those
Are thoughts. And if you just watch the thing we posted last week from the podcast with Dr. Paul Jenkins, you'll get into some thick principle about thoughts have more than one word to them. Feelings can be explained with one word.
Yeah.
So what happens is if you come into my office and I'm like, tell me how you feel, and we talk about feelings, I can help you feel better, but I'm not understanding and not getting to know why you think that. So when I started having to pose the question, what are my thoughts on being neglected? That was hard, because for the first time, I'm like, well, I feel like I'm, not worthy of love. And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa.
That's still a thought.
That's still a thought. Why did I think I wasn't worthy of love? Well, because my mother never gave it to me. It didn't seem as though I was important in her eyes. Tell me why. Because she was so absorbed with her own life. She was a kid having kids, and so on and so forth. For all of a sudden, I'm starting to see, wait a minute, those are my perceptions. That's what I'm thinking. Those thoughts created feelings of unloved, of sadness, of grief, of depression.
So I think right here, it's good to point out that this is also a way of, it's kind of like panning for gold. Okay, so instead of just, I can't go to therapy till I know what the issue is, because then I'm going to waste my money, because I just need to know so I can get in and figure it out. You're going to go in and take a big scoop, and then you're going to shake it down. You're going to let out, okay, obviously it's not that. Oh, okay, it's not that. And that's a lot of times what a therapist is doing, is just helping you identify what's important and what's not, and what's connected maybe and what's not. And so you're just shaking out, okay, I always thought that was the big issue, but those are the little grains of sand that can just go through. We're looking for something else, and keep shaking.
So as we go through this process, and as I'm thinking, well, these are my thoughts, my thoughts on neglect, I thought that I was, overlooked. I really thought as though I couldn't be loved. I really thought as though I deserved that kind of treatment. Those turned into the feelings of sadness and all those things. But then I had to find out, okay, so knowing this, what do I want? And what I want is the opposite of neglect, which is what? Love. Being seen, included,
heard, valued.
But what do I want for myself as it pertains to neglect? What do I want for others, which is my wife, my children, people that are close to me? I want them never to have to feel that. So what I want for them is to feel my love, to feel my heart.
Be able to express love appropriately.
Exactly. And then what do I want for others? The people that I work with, the people that I associate with, the people that I have friends and stewardship with, but aren't close. I want them to learn. But here comes the hard part, listeners, is that if I know my core issue is neglect, and all my thoughts created my addiction to suppress the feelings, what am I going to do about it? Because you've got to do something tangible, something you can touch.
Identifying is great.
Oh, of course.
But then what? Kind of a thing. Now I have it. I have the gold here. Now what do I do with it?
Yeah, this is the hard part. Yeah, I love this analogy, Mercy. You're spot on. Once you have it, what do you do with it, right? Most people, when they have gold, they hide it, right? Yeah. They can't let anybody see it
in your pocket.
Some people they fall into like, one day at a times, and they'll clean your side of the street before the other, whatever. Those stay in your lanes. You have to do something tangible, something physical that you're going to actively do, and you've got to pick a wins the now. Because if you don't, you have the recipe for success, but you don't turn on the oven.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's just keeping that gold instead of what are you going to turn that gold into?
So what does it look like?
How do you use that as a strength?
For me, I knew what I needed to do. I needed to have the person that I truly believe didn't see me to see me, and then to hear me. And when the opportunity arose and I stood up to that, I was abruptly hung up on because it was a phone call.
Mhm.
And I'm like, no, she didn't just hang up on me because I had much more to say. But her last words to me were, if you keep pushing this, I'll never talk to you again. And I said, you be very careful because I'll respect that. And she hung up on me.
Yeah.
She neglected me again. So I sat down and I wrote a letter.
So instead of going, here, I'm neglected again, and just
Mhm.
rolling over, you were like, I'm going to do something else because I need to be heard.
So
I
for
need to be
me,
seen.
what I did to this physical thing was writing a letter, now giving her everything. I wouldn't have given her this much on the phone. I truly don't believe that. But I gave her everything. Help me understand how a mother who says that they love their children, who's actively used that word with me on multiple occasions, never showed it because you would leave for weeks. How would a mother who said that you loved us, bring these men into our homes that physically abused us, sexually abused us? Because that doesn't seem like love. And I let her have it. I wrote this letter that was pages and pages long. And then that felt really good, but it wasn't done. Because I had to fold that thing up and I had to go put it in the mailbox with like 5 stamps to send it. And when I let that letter go in the post office box, I knew that my life would change in one or two ways. One, she would read it, seek out some humility and apologize and say, I hear you. Or she would say true to her word, which was, I never want to speak to you again. And 7 years went by before I got a card in the mail saying Merry Christmas. 7 years. And it hurt, but I had the answer. I was no longer going to allow myself to be neglected because that is my core issue. That's the thing that drove my addiction. That's the thing that gave me anxiety and depression. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So what happened too is that through that 7 years, I was also building relationships. I wasn't just waiting for her to respond. Marissa and I were married. We created a family. I went to school. I became a therapist. All these amazing things happened. And when she kind of cracked that door open just a bit, I welcomed it. It never manifested into anything, but it was enough for me to know that she read the letter.
And I think in those situations, it's so important when you have your act, what you're going to do, that you don't have expectations.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to do because, yeah, you have hopes and dreams of what you would like this huge, step in your life to create. But really, you can only worry about yourself as, okay, I'm going to do this. And just in this action of writing this letter, I need to let it go. And then I put it out as, okay, now it's on them to do something without any expectation of how it will be done and how they will reciprocate. Because if you held on to like waiting for your mom to say, I love you back and I'm sorry, that never came.
Never came.
A sorry never really came. It came in the way she would have done it 7 years later, but it wasn't what I'm sure you had expected or envisioned. And if you had held on to that, it would have just continued to drag you down. And then when she did show up 7 years later and it still wasn't what you wanted, that could have like had you just collapse again. And you can't do that. So you have to be able to say, this is me standing up and saying, I will be seen. I will not be neglected anymore. And I'm here. And then start finding other places where you can be seen and heard. So not just from that population.
I love it. So to truly become one with myself before I could even become one with Marissa or anyone else, I needed to kind of figure out what made me tick. So let's expand this now onto the question of what happens if you have a disorder, things like clinical depression, things like bipolar disorders, those things, right? Well, first and foremost, I have a pretty good case of attention deficit, pretty heavy. And it's interesting because I didn't realize for the longest time why I put things on hold, why I couldn't finish things. I started, how come I let things go in one ear and out the other? And even having this diagnosis for many years now, it still plagues some of the marriage between Marissa and I, because in the mornings before the medication, before I wake up, if she wakes up and she's like, hey, so this is what we're going to do.
I wake up
A, B, C, D. And I'm like,
and I can go, but he has to warm up.
So what's happened over the years, listeners, is that I've had to teach Marissa and she's had to teach me about ourselves. This is how I operate. And she says, okay, if that's how you operate, then I'll wait until this time to start, laying down the to-do list or
So
getting your
I
opinions or your
often
thoughts?
would get I have to make my list
Mhm.
because I love it if he would wake up and I'd be like, okay, A, B, C, D, E, but he doesn't work that way. So I have to make a list and like hold it till he's warmed up and ready.
And so she's taught me how to mentally prepare for what needs to, tasks to be mastered. At the same time, I've taught her this is the window that I'm kind of still asleep. I may be awake, but I'm a zombie. Vice versa. There's things that she's taught me about, hey, when you say something that you're going to do, I want you to do it. Don't just placate me and say it's going to get done, because to me, I've got to know that this is finished. So I've learned to like say, hey, this is what I've done. This task is finished. This one's still in gear. And it sounds kind of like generic and stale, but what it's done is it allowed us to understand how to communicate with one another. So because of my disorder, you could call it, she's been able to learn how to work with me. I had to teach her how to work with me. She had to teach me how to work with her. It works so much better.
Yeah.
But the hard part is what if you don't know like how to work with bipolar disorder? It's like this. I've heard this so many times where someone's had a mania type feeling and they get tons of stuff done and they're so good to be around and blah, blah, blah. But then this depression kicks in. And all of a sudden the spouse or whatever is like, what's going on?
I like that other one. Got
Yeah.
a lot of stuff done.
Or vice versa. It's like, the bipolar mania is like off the top. They're coming home with new trucks and spending all this money. And you're like, what the heck? But when they're depressed, you're like, okay, manageable, or unpredictable. So the thing is we have to also understand that there's a high probability that our spouse, our loved ones have a disorder and they are real. They are not fake. I've seen this a ton with post-traumatic stress disorder in people. I've seen it with bipolar, where a spouse doesn't understand. And so they get upset because why can't our relationship just be normal?
Yeah.
But what happens?
Look in the mirror. I can promise you're not normal. Or that your expectations or what you think or how you think the world should work. Sorry, that's not how it works for everybody. So everybody has to learn to adjust. And so learning how to give and take and how, there's things that I just get really rigid on too. And Blue knows that's okay. I've got to give right here.
Negotiables and non-negotiables.
I'm taking. And we have to be able to learn some of that tug of war and who is giving and taking at different times to be able to help so that we can work together. But I can promise you, if you're thinking that everything is the other person, that's the biggest problem. You're not perfect. So quit thinking you are and everyone else is broken because they don't work the way you do.
And the other side of that, people with addiction, histories and recovery, you're not the victim either.
Yeah.
Right. It's not, oh, poor me. I could definitely use my history as a great excuse to be a world-class drug addict. I really, truly could. But what would that serve me? Right? What would that serve my family? What would that serve my community? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't. And so this understanding and awareness, I truly believe we have to understand ourselves. And when we neglect ourselves by, avoiding the hard stuff, we find ourselves typecast into lives that we don't want.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to anyone.
I love looking at it as it's hard, easy. Often people want to do whatever's easy now.
I try that.
Not recognizing that you do the easy thing now. It doesn't matter what it is. It will get hard later. You do the hard thing now, it will get easier. If that is teaching your kids how to clean when they're toddlers and like young children, this was difficult. Okay, kids don't like to clean. They're not good at it, but being able to take what they can do and being proud of that. Now our kids, not all of them, but
some are still learning.
Our kids are so much better. And I can just say, hey, clean the house, and they can do it by themselves and get most of it done. But man, it took so many years and hours of the hard to get to the easier now. Everything's not perfect, but it's doing the hard stuff now. And sometimes that is asking yourself the hard questions. It's having the hard conversations with your spouse about what can you manage? What can I manage? What can I do different? Why does that offend you? And being open to hearing their feedback is really hard because it's painful and it sucks and it's not happy. But then you get to being able to work together easier, that it's almost like riding a tandem bike and that you each take your turn and it just goes smooth.
And when you look at that and you start looking at other issues that could potentially harm a relationship, you look at things like pornography and sex addictions and those things. If we're not talking about those things with our spouse, if we're not saying, "Hey, I'm struggling, I'm compelled, or I've been viewing this stuff," you are going to increase the likelihood of destroying that relationship. And when you receive that information, how you handle it is crucial, right? Like, I can't believe you. How dare you?
Freak out.
Yeah, it's like, I understand that there's disappointment there, but what do you want? Do you want to help heal the relationship, or do you want to throw in the towel and be done? And
Because what their behavior isn't okay in your eyes. Guess what? Your behavior isn't okay in their eyes. So it really is that it goes both ways.
It's got to go both ways.
It has to go both ways.
And if the right help is applied, and if the right understanding is developed, and the right support is present, I truly believe there's nothing you as a couple and as a relationship can't overcome. I said it last night in the meeting when my mask finally came off with Marissa as I was going to therapy before we were married. And I was exposed to all of the realities that I had experienced with the abuse, the poverty, just the scarcity, and why I would, lie to avoid people to get to know who I am. Once all that was out in the open, Marissa got to make the best decision for her. She said, "Okay, I know all of the good about you, and I know all of the bad about you, and I'm okay with that." She got to choose. I was fully intending, listeners, to never tell her about the bad stuff. And you have any idea what would have happened if I would have carried those secrets into marriage after having kids and then had that stuff exposed? Oh man, I don't even want to think. It would have
seen it happen.
It would have fallen into the same pattern as my mother with the 7 marriages and divorces that she had to her life. There's no way on an emotional level I could have done that. It's not who I am. So thank heavens for a therapist that asked me some dumb questions that ended up being life-changing. I was also, in a funny and weird way, ready to let it go.
Yeah.
You've got to be ready. This is why anyone can find sobriety and recovery anywhere. You can find it under a rock if you're willing to do the work. Don't you think?
Oh, 100%. It takes time. It takes work. It's the hard now, the easy later. And which hard are you willing to do? Are you willing to do it now or later? And taking that control is so important.
I think of people that I've watched that have overcome like severe like challenges in life, things like disabilities, and I see these families whose wives or husbands slowly develop a deteriorating disease like Parkinson's disease, or I've seen people that have had accidents after marriage by which they're left paralyzed, quadriplegic, and these families stay intact. This wife stays by her husband's side, and I remember thinking, why would they do that? Like, that's gotta impede on their quality of life. And I've seen the error in that thinking, because when you make that commitment to give your heart, to marry, to move forward with someone, it's a big deal, and it's incredible when I see that. But there are times when that person on the other side of that addiction doesn't want it either. And therefore, you cannot allow yourself to be disrespected in a way that they're not willing to do the hard work either.
It becomes abusive.
It becomes abusive. Things like infidelity, things like continued substance use, things like abuse to you or your family. There are some non-negotiable rules out there that if that line is crossed, it's a no-go. And so therefore, I'm saying it's not just a cut and dry thing of like, you learn how to work with them, they learn how to work with you, and you guys suffer through it. I truly believe that if you're doing the work and your partner's not, there's going to become a point of no return where it's going to be harder for you to go back and retrieve that person than it is for you to continue your journey. And that's sad for them. Yeah. And so there's a lot to this. I would highly recommend getting into a therapist that you feel comfortable with. I think aligning yourself with a therapist is crucial, because there's a lot of good ones out there and there's some not so hot ones out there, and you won't know until you find one that works for you.
So if things don't feel right, if you feel like you've been going for a while and maybe there's not a connection that you're feeling, I know it's hard to start over and feel okay, I have to retell my whole story and learn to trust somebody else. But I can promise you, it makes the world of difference when you find something that fits and somebody that works.
Absolutely. And one that challenges you, one that's not going to just make you feel better, but help change your thinking. I think that's crucial.
Yeah,
you
so
know,
important.
Well, that's a good topic. I'm glad that we were able to help with that. Do you have anything else on your agenda? All right, listeners, well, I want to thank you for joining us today. Again, this will be posted as a podcast. It'll be available tomorrow, which would be Thursday. And please continue to reach out to us, addict2athlete.org, for all of our content information, for if you want to get a hold of Marissa or I. If you need some help with overcoming some of these things, we have great resources on there. There are therapy options there that you can schedule. Shoot, if you feel so inclined and you feel like you're ready and you'd like to become part of the Addict to Athlete family, we have a legit certified addiction recovery course to help you become one of our recovery coaches, with some pretty intense training by which you could yourself become a coach of Addict to Athlete in a chapter that you develop in your community, so you can give back. So check out those resources and all of our backlog podcasts. Marissa has all of them up there and they're categorized. So if you need some education, they're there. If you want some inspiration, they're there. Shoot, it's just kind of at your fingertips. So we'd love to have you join us, addict2athlete.org. And athletes, until next time, please go turn that mess of addiction into the message of sobriety. This is that awkward exit stage left that we do, right?
So it should turn it off on yours.
It didn't say end of recording, but it should. Here.
That's studio. We're in Zoom, so it's off because I turned off the menu.
Did it say end of recording? I didn't hear it.
Would it not have done it because I did it on ours? Did it not record?
It should have. I clipped it over there. So does that make sense? You heard it right when I said recording now. I don't remember. Huh?
Zoom's out, not up. So
Zoom is right here. I recorded it to the computer itself. I don't know.
I said